visual art, it primarily looks the same if you look away for 10 minutes and you look back. Whereas music, it relies on how you feel and respond to all the different relationships between the different elements.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. Thanks, Kieran, for joining me for these 3 questions. Kieran is a wonderful sound engineer and musician, and lover of all sorts of music, and has been a big help and support in making my music come to life and recorded. It's nice to have you as part of this. Okay, well, the first question is, why do you have music in your life?
I've kind of got 2 parts to this question. I thought about it a fair bit, and I've thought about it, I guess, from the angle of biographically and aesthetically. And I think I'd like to start with the aesthetic side of it first, because I think that to me is the reason why I've kept it in my life and I've pursued it, because anything ephemeral that's in our life is always going to let us down in the act of attaining it. It's always somewhere beyond our reach. And I kind of feel that the process of doing art is far more important than capturing the art. And whether you identify the art as the process or the result hanging on a gallery, being sold on a digital store, being listened to in people's earbuds, I kind of feel like the actual process of creation and the process of the art being observed by the audience, whether it's listening, whether it's reading, whether it's visual, as the art enters the other perception, I think that's the reason why I continue being engaged in art and primarily music. I guess biographically, I've gone through many different forms of art. I started out as a visual artist. That was my first training, because I went to Mount Lawley Primary, and they did the whole music thing, and people from WAAPA came out and checked out my embouchure and said, no, you have a terrible embouchure. You are not going to be a trumpet player. We don't care that you might be a good saxophone player. We've got enough of those. So, yeah, I kind of missed out at that point. And I went and did visual art in high school. I got part of the visual art program at Balcatta. And so through that process, I became aware of music, as most teenagers do, just through kind of the peer listening things, and realizing that what my dad showed me from his vinyl collection was nothing like what my friends listened to. So I would listen to ECM and Bob Dylan and The Doors and Pink Floyd and classical. And suddenly there was just all this rock stuff. So I didn't actually know that there were things called genres. I just thought everyone just did their thing and that was their thing. And so then going through the whole art side of the visual art side of things, eventually I got to a point I helped out doing sound at a church I was going to at the time, and I decided it'd be really good if I learned how to do this well, so that it only fed back maybe once or twice during the service, because none of us knew what we were doing. It was all volunteer help. So I was at a loose end, and I decided to go to WAAPA and study how to do sound. Then I discovered recording is really, really cool, because you can fix up everyone's mistakes after the event. And that's much more fun than live sound, where everyone turns around and looks at you because you've done something wrong. And it's not even you. It's someone's walked right in front of a speaker with a microphone, or they've pointed the microphone at the fold back. They've just dropped the microphone on the floor, but everyone looks at the sound guy. So I kind of thought, you know, this live thing, it's too dangerous. So yeah, WAAPA was a great place to kind of learn that. And I guess that was where I started understanding a bit more about music. And I remember on the way to uni one day, I heard a song that I'd heard hundreds of times before. And I just realized that the lyrics weren't just words that someone wrote. And I mean, I guess what hit me was the profound self-revelation of the lyricist, that they're putting a story out about what they were going through, and they were using metaphors because they weren't necessarily comfortable with people seeing those more emotions in a raw fashion. And that, up to that point, I was kind of just thinking of it as something on a wall that you observed, as opposed to this thing of direct communication. I'm reaching out and trying to communicate something about life to whoever is out there. I want to share my emotions. I want to share my triumphs, my weaknesses, whatever it might be. And that really changed my perception of music. And so as someone who records music more than plays it, I've got music in my life because I understand that all art, and especially music, is about communicating to other people. And the more ways we have to communicate to other people, the better place we can make the world. A couple of points I'd like to put on that as well. I came across a quote, and this kind of, I guess, covers how I see both art and music. And if art is how we decorate space, music is how we decorate time. And I kind of feel that there's that transient nature of what it is that music evokes. And that's kind of the very different product of music to a lot of other art forms, is that visual art, it primarily looks the same if you look away for 10 minutes and you look back. Whereas music, it relies on how you feel and respond to all the different relationships between the different elements. And if you're focusing on one element, you might miss a relationship to another element. And that's pretty much a metaphor for our relationships with each other. So I kind of feel that in that form, music is quite an expansive dialect for art, and something that inherently requires an audience, as opposed to a painting. You can kind of paint for yourself. I mean, you can make music for yourself, but it's always, the minute you put it out, it's always limited by your ability to express yourself. And when you're being that vulnerable to express yourself, it's really trying to reach out to the other person. That's the act of creating the art in that sense. So that's been a big part of why I've continued on with it, is to continue that dialogue.
Yeah, a painter doesn't need another person to, they just paint directly onto the canvas. There's no sort of middleman. Where do you see yourself in that process? Because I really like, live performance is great, because you need to experience it there, and once it's there, it's gone, and only the people there were the ones that were in that special time and place. But yeah, sort of capturing. Yeah, where do you see yourself in that process? Sort of capturing the art. I don't know. I'm not even sure if I know what I'm asking, but
well, I'll respond to what I think you're asking,
okay,
and we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, great.
I guess where I see myself as both an artist and a facilitator of art is a picture framer has to understand the goal of the artist in order to frame the picture in a way that draws attention to the important parts of the painting. And I kind of feel like if you've ever seen those ridiculous, overwrought picture frames from, I don't know, like 14th century or whatever, where the frame's so much bigger than the artwork.
Yeah.
But even still, your eyes are drawn in to the actual point of it. And I guess an artwork that's strong in itself, you try and have a minimal touch because you're going, it's this person's expression. Artwork where the musician doesn't have a clear idea of what they're trying to do, often you embellish it to the point of kind of making it visually appealing, or I mean, in a musical term, orally appealing, but you're making it appealing to the senses because the artist themselves doesn't have a clear vision for maybe what's important, or they're not sure how they should attract attention to their work. So they want you to put all this extra stuff around their music, around their creation to do it. So in that sense, I guess, and because I'm familiar with the painting paradigm, it's much like a lot of the masters had people doing the undercoats. They'd have people, like, they'd sketch out the painting and they'd have all these sketches and they'd have people laying down the black for the shadows, and then they'd put the glazes over the top themselves, or things like that. It depends who the artist was as to how much they did that. But similar role to a composer who, or a conductor who has to interpret what's written, you know, what is already set as the music, and then has to try and evoke that response from the performer. And the performer doesn't necessarily have a direct connection to the intent of the music or the piece. So the performer's like being the hands and the feet of the composer, the conductor's being the hands and feet of the composer, but they've got different kind of roles in that creative aspect. And I guess for myself, I kind of view it more as, can I hear that person is actually engaging with what I perceive as their art form?
Well, maybe the second question, which is how do you make music? Yeah. How do you make music?
I'll I guess mention myself as a musician first. So I'm untrained. I picked up bass and joined an indie rock band, and that didn't go very long. I mean, it was probably about 3 years of my life, maybe 4 years of my life, but it didn't go very far. I'd always just kind of tinkered around with bass for, I don't know, 15 years, and just playing in my bedroom, not really doing anything with it. It was just fun. And I knew that I wasn't amazing at it. I worked with the band. The bass player quit about halfway through the recording to pursue a very lucrative job in the resources sector.
Can you blame them?
Yeah. No. And because I'd been working on the music as a recording engineer, the band approached me and said, do you want to be the bass player in the band? You can play bass, you know the songs intimately by now.
Well, yeah, you would have listened to them the most as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So it was a really difficult challenge for me to kind of be on both sides of the recording experience at the same time, because as an engineer, you're always going, here's the client's budget, here's the limitations that I have to try and fit all the value into, because everyone's dream is limitless. And you're always trying to squish this infinite dream into a very small container that ends up being an MP3. And you're trying to get the most value out of the experience for them. And then on the flip side of that, I'm suddenly in an experience where I've got the freedom to create and it's my own time, which is, something I can always justify spending more time doing something on. So I'm going, I would actually force myself to play things without editing them as much as I could, as opposed to the traditional thing, which is, let's just get the ideas down, chop it all together, because that's really quick and effective, and then we'll see how it goes. Maybe we'll learn that and practice in our own time, and then we'll go and do it again. But I actually got to the point where I was like, I'd just be sitting down and recording and just going, I'm just going to try everything I can to find all the different parameters of texture and tone that I could pull out of the instrument, and seeing what would actually make a good effect. And because it was kind of indie pop music, I was trying to be super subtle and get away with as much as possible and avoid playing root notes for almost the entire song if I could, because I didn't want to be a dumb bass player. And I know that that's a silly thing to want to do, but I was just like, I'm going to be playing so much of this root note for this song. I want to actually enjoy playing the song and doing something. And I usually made it more complex than I was capable of playing. But it was fun. So that my creative aspect was more about trying to capture that moment. But then going, the moment that I'm capturing is not like just the first thing that comes out. I'm trying to actually capture the moment of the emotion. So that's kind of my creative process for being a musician, is trying to find what's the appropriate response and then spending as much time as necessary to document that response. And then the process is more me delving into my response to the music that's maybe someone else has written, and find my way to accentuate all the emotions of their song. I mean, as a bass player, I'm usually in a support role, so it's not that dissimilar to being an audio engineer in a lot of ways, at least in my bass playing. So it was always a case of thinking, how does this react to the melody? How does this react to the essential story of the song? Because the songwriter is really keen on their lyrics. Anything that takes away from those lyrics is a bad choice, no matter how cool and clever it might be. So I would, for some songs, be completely happy. And I think there was one song where I basically just stayed on one note for almost the entire song while the chords changed around me, because I just wanted to present just a backbone, because the song itself was relentless. So I was thinking more about what drove the meaning of the lyrics more than what was interesting to play. And I hated playing it, but I knew it was the right choice. So that's the musical side of it. I guess as a audio engineer, the first step is always identifying what the storyline someone's trying to put forward is. Primarily when I have people in the studio, they don't have song titles. I try not to hear bad demo recordings beforehand, especially if someone else has engineered them. It's very much a process of me thinking about how they want to communicate to the world, because some of that will be a function of their budget, because everyone wants to use all the expensive mics all the time on every single part of the recording, but no one has the budget to hire them. So we're always kind of making compromises about how we're going to frame that artwork. And so my first step is trying to find out what's important to the musician about their communication to the world, and try and find the way that I can do that most. So if a musician's more comfortable playing live, for me to get people to record it part by part through overdubbing ruins the integrity of their vision. If people, on the other hand, want to create a soundscape that is impossible to play live, for me to go, well, let's set you up in a room and let's not record a metronome, let's just do the live thing. I'm actually limiting how much they can develop their music afterwards from that initial recording. So it's always a case of trying to capture what the intent of the artist is, and then I can guide them towards decisions that make the process align with their vision for an end result. And once someone's done a certain number of takes, you're going, okay, am I hearing them getting better or worse?
Yeah.
And we're at, like 1 hour, 30 minutes that we've spent on that song, working it out, trying different drum sounds, trying different guitar sounds, whatever it might be, and they're just not feeling the vibe. It's kind of like, well, maybe we should move on now, even though we haven't actually captured that moment. Because the longer we spend not capturing that moment, the more it becomes a rock in the creative process, and the other creative parts of the process won't come to fruition. So sometimes you've got to push through that, but you've got to be continually checking. I guess it's like in a big band situation, you're very aware of everyone's chops and their stamina and how long they can actually manage to keep going, rehearsing that one section that everyone's getting wrong. You don't want to punish them to the point that they can't actually get a take. And once people are in the studio, I don't have the ability to say, go home and don't worry about paying for the studio, don't worry about paying for the piano tuner, don't worry about all those things that we had planned, because you're just not ready. I've got to try and somehow pull whatever I can out of that. And most people I think are becoming more responsive to the idea that the more time they spend on their music before they come to me, the more I can help them get something good. And I'll always try and persuade people. So I guess that's the most important part of what it is I do in the creative process. I guess the other two things that I have a lot of input into are choices of takes, because I'm hearing the songs for often the first time as they're being recorded. So I'm able to tell the musician what it sounds like to someone who has no idea what their music is doing.
Yeah, I find that really useful, working with you, because you're hearing it for the first time. We've rehearsed it, and I've been dealing with it for months before that, and to get that fresh view, and an informed view that I trust as well is very comforting in the studio. So thank you. If I haven't told you that before, thank you.
You're absolutely welcome. And to me, the thing that is so important is that aspect of trust, because if someone doesn't trust me in a recording studio, they're not going to feel comfortable giving their most emotional performance. So it's something I really try hard to foster, is a friendly environment. I've not always been successful. As you start out in any career, you've got opinions, and slowly your opinions kind of become more about you, like in a good way. They become about you kind of holding yourself accountable rather than trying to force everyone else to obey your ideas.
Yeah.
Kind of getting my opinion out the way to allow people to have that place where they can emote and be creative is really important. So the other two parts of the creative process that I guess I'm quite involved in is editing. So choosing the takes, helping musos to decide what mistakes are musical and what mistakes are distracting. Because sometimes, like there's a thing that it's like, this is what it is written to be on the page, but the listener never gets to see that, or very rarely gets to see what's written on the page. And if people are out of time or whatever, sometimes when you mix it, I recently worked on an album, I'm not going to mention it, but it was going through so many tempo changes that I couldn't justify the time to program out a metronome for all the different tempo and meter changes. So I just went and recorded it, and then wherever there was a little hiccup in the tempo, I just kind of stretched out the groove so that it felt more natural transitioning between takes, because it was easier for the band to just play the way they felt it. And initially I'm going, it's a bit lumpy here, it's a bit lumpy there. By the time it was mixed, William Bowden made the comment that, who does the mastering, he made the comment that it was just amazingly complex music, and he was like just stunned at how full it sounded. He didn't make any mention of any of the hiccups or anything like that, because it was all kind of dealt with, and not just from an editing point of view, but because the band were willing to trust me to go, this is the quickest way to deal with those changes, rather than try and just make it mathematically correct.
Yeah.
So it's very much a case of going, what do I perceive about this? What's making me feel uncomfortable? And so editing is one of those things where I'm trying to second guess what problems are going to come up later on. So the singer will be like, oh, I really hate my pitch on that note. And they can't afford to re-record it, or there wasn't enough time to get multiple takes, or it was what it was. And so I've got to think of ways of how can I maybe just fade off the end of that note where their vibrato just gets a little wild. How can I tame that? Because it's more the fact that it's just too present or too close to the listener. Yeah. Because we all go to gigs and we hear people who are grossly out of tune on a gig, and we think it's amazing, and then we hear a recording back of that gig and we're like, ooh.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I was so convinced that was amazing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of the live gig in the moment, is that you're actually aware of people's emotions in a way that you're not when you're listening to a recording. So again, I'm always trying to draw those emotional moments out rather than the technically perfect moments.
Yeah.
Because I want to persuade people the world's emotional rather than technical.
Oh, amen.
And so then so same sort of thing with the mixing is my creative aspect with the mixing is to try and frame the artwork, like I mentioned, of the picture frame analogy, and do all those things that hide all the little foibles and musician sins that kind of creep their way through, and make it as though I've done nothing. I don't want people to necessarily hear all my tricks, because they're not there. So no one looks at an album and goes, Kieran worked on that, therefore it's going to be good music. I want them to listen to MFO and go, I love those songs.
Well, maybe third question.
So the couple of thoughts that I kind of noted down is, I guess, the thing that I've been talking about is witnessing people emoting. So I'm really enjoying live gigs. I'm enjoying the fact that I live in probably the safest place in the world right now, and that I am privileged to be able to go and see musicians at the peak of their craft doing amazing things with expressing themselves. And whether it's as a result of, I went to some of the WAAPA graduation recitals and I saw some world-class performances, and going and seeing world-class musicians who are over here and playing to smaller crowds than they probably ever play to normally, and just witnessing the community aspect of it, the sharing aspect. That to me is what's exciting. And we kind of touched about the thing of going to a gig and hearing music and being blown away by it, and then listening back to a recording and then going, ooh, didn't notice that at the time, didn't notice that. I think there's something about the communal and tribal aspect of music that doesn't really get touched on. So I'm kind of more excited in the collaborative space at the moment, and that to me is, obviously that happens in recording, but seeing people actually communicate on stage with people that they don't normally communicate with, and seeing the dialogues that even spontaneously arise in those situations when people allow the music to be at the center of it. Some recordings I've been part of, it's been interesting to hear there being like, say it's a quintet, there's that extra person, there's that sixth person who's part of it, and that's the silence that they're making the music grow out of. And so to me, the thing that's most exciting is seeing people challenge the silence and challenging the apathy to not create. So going to a gig and seeing people put an effort into sharing this ephemeral, transitory emotion for even a couple of hours, sharing what's on their mind, what's on their heart, is really precious. So that's something that I find very courageous about musicians. I hope to show that kind of courage in the way I work as well. But it's very much a selfless act to kind of dig into yourself and show the world who you are, because you're very rarely going to get the recognition of what it was you're actually doing. People just, it's a very raw thing that a lot of people might not identify with. So it can be very challenging to a listener in some cases. And I find that incredibly courageous.
Well, maybe on that note, thank you very much for your insight. I always enjoy talking with you, Kieran, and working with you.
Thank you very much, sir. Feelings mutual.